All right, if everyone could just take their seats, we're going to roll right into the HIWU panel, moderated by Dr. Jeff Blea.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the HIWU strategy session this morning in Tucson, Arizona. My name is Dr. Jeff Blea. I'm a former racetrack practitioner in Southern California and currently the California Equine Medical Director. Our three special guests this morning to discuss the HIWU strategy are Chief of Science, Dr. Mary Scollay, Chief of Operations, Kate Mittelstadt, and Chief of Investigations, Shaun Richards. With that, I'd like each one of our presenters this morning to tell you all a little bit about themselves. Dr. Scollay?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Mary Scollay. I've been a racing regulatory veterinarian since 1987. Former equine medical director for the former first female, right, did Mark Guilfoyle. Thank you very much for that. That's how he introduces me. First female equine medical director for the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission, former executive director of the RMTC, and now chief of science for HIWU.
Hi, I'm Shaun Richards. I was formerly an FBI agent for 23 years before joining HIWU. I was fortunate enough in my career to work on the Service and Navarro investigation before taking this position.
My name is Kate Mittelstadt. I'm the Chief of Operations for HIWU. That encompasses oversight of the testing programs and a lot of the logistical considerations, as well as collaboration with Mary and Shaun. My background coming into this was on the human anti-doping side, and it was funny because I was reading the profiles going into this, and I think I get to update my bio soon to reflect work in this industry, which has been really rewarding. So excited to be part of the panel.
Okay, thank you all. And with that, I think we'll begin with a short presentation by Kate Mittelstadt on the HIWU testing strategy to cover risk assessment, test distribution, planning, and prioritization. Kate?
Thanks, Dr. Blea. Thanks to RTIP as well for the opportunity. We were presented the title of The Peek Behind the Curtain, and we kind of thought hard about what that actually was intended to mean and why we were asked or given time on this agenda to talk about this. And I think there's obviously, as the title implies, a little intrigue, some interest. So there's certainly an opportunity there for us as a panel to talk about how we approach our work, what resources we have to do our work, and how kind of our efforts as HIWU can uniquely contribute in this space, in this industry. So when we think about what's behind the curtain, ultimately I think it's really this industry, and that's a collaboration. It's finding a resource in HISA and HIWU that furthers the goal of this industry. And so at the heart of what we do is the rules, and those are really for all of us just a click away. They're on the internet, they're on the website. You can find them in their current state as well as their proposed red line state. But ultimately for HIWU, that's how we operate. That's our grounding rules. That is how we progress this program. So I think it's important to understand that that's the foundation. And while we can certainly look around and see opportunity and have advocated for change, not only formally within the rules, but from a process perspective, we still have to ensure that we are working in conjunction with those rules to make this program effective. So today we'll kind of talk a little bit about what the rules tell us, and I will do that just as a real foundational start to this session, and then we'll kind of turn over to a broader conversation. So in anti-doping on the human side and across all sport is this concept of a test distribution plan. And when we think about this from the perspective of HIWU, although the rules talk about it very specifically from a testing plan, what we really look at is how do we allocate resource from a testing perspective, from an investigations, an analytical, and a scientific perspective in order to make this program work. So for us, it's really an all-encompassing strategy. It's not just about testing. So with that in mind, there's a little bit of participation from you guys. I'm not going to call on anyone, but I'm going to ask you to kind of sit, hopefully think about a question I want to pose and not search your phone, but if you want to take the time for some email, you can. But what I want to ask is, if you were given the opportunity, and hopefully it would be seen as an opportunity and not a dreaded task, but to provide information. Think of it, we talk about tips, we talk about informants, but it's also information sharing and communication. So if you were given that opportunity, what would you want to pass along? I'm going to suggest that if you take the opportunity, as I might ask you to talk about it with your neighbor, leave names out of it in this forum, but think about, do you know something that could inform and make this program more effective? So take a couple minutes and think about that, talk about it with the person next to you, and then we will continue our discussion.
Are we ready to go? Want Jeff to?
No, I'll bring it back.
Okay. They're thinking. They're thinking. We can, okay. Okay, you guys can continue that conversation over a break, but hopefully I'm going to have Dr. Blea bring us back to the other part of the question, which is how many of you have actually shared any information previously with us? And if not, why? And I think that's, you know, a really important part of this panel today and the conversation today is understanding how and why to share information, and then ultimately what we do with it. But part of why I thought that would be interesting from this group in this room is that we all represent different perspectives in this industry, different relationships in this industry, different professional interests in this industry, and ultimately have access, as we've talked a lot over the last couple of days, to different data sets, different analytical tools by which to analyze this industry. But our motivations for caring in that respect are different, but two themes we've heard constantly in sessions over the last 2 days that ultimately inform this strategy as well is, how do we use this to further the integrity of this industry? And ultimately, how do we ensure it provides for greater safety for the equine and human athletes in this space? So that is part of what our job is. And the details of the rules give us some context for how to use the testing program to facilitate that. But again, when people think about the strategy or what's going on behind the curtain, there's this sense that there's this unknown. But ultimately, there's a lot of common sense, and then there's what we ultimately do with it. So these are not shared with the intention that I will read them or that you will read them in this session, but rather to show you within the rules, there is a 5,000 series that talks about the testing program and how we execute it. And it talks about this concept of a risk assessment. It's looking broadly at the industry and specifically at horses or trainers to decide how we want to respond with the tools of our program. And so what informs the idea of risk are things here. So obviously there's just the potential, there's the motivations, there's the idea of using statistics and information. Obviously performance plays into this calculation. Understanding the industry, the seasons and the trends of the industry, when is it about training and when is it about competition. And then prioritizing that. And I think there's an assumption that what our response should always be is testing. And that's really not the way we think about our work. Certainly testing is part of it, but a response to identifying a risk
could be testing. It could be deploying Shaun's resources. It could be calling on Mary to say, how do we set up the labs for success in order to be able to detect or deter the use of a substance or a method or a practice that is compromising the industry or the sport. So that plan, again, very common things, and probably nothing on these slides that didn't cross at some point in your mind if you participated in the exercise we just did about why we look at certain horses or why we look at certain opportunities to deploy resources in this program. Third-party association. One of the things that we want to make sure we're doing is looking beyond a single instance. So usually the idea, and Shaun can talk about this more, is there's not just one instance of a substance being used. And so we want to figure out, are there systematic things happening in this industry that we can disrupt in order to improve the integrity and protect the welfare of the horses? A tool that we use, and I think has negative connotation, but really as an industry should be seen as responsible allocation of the resource, is this idea of target testing. So the idea that we're going to use all this information and we are going to target what we do in response. I remember an early visit to a racetrack and talking with some sample collection personnel and some vets, and they said, we would never say that. And I think it's important to be honest with the industry, to be honest with the horsemen who kind of default to the idea that, well, I know you're just going to tell us it's all random, but this doesn't feel random. And while we're not necessarily going to share, this is the specific reason you were selected for testing today, this set of rules, these guidelines, these guideposts are relevant to the industry in understanding how we approach those selections. So I don't think it should be considered that we are being dishonest by saying that everything's random, because that's not what we say. We are trying to be very specific in the way that we allocate the resources within this program. So the real strength then is what we do with the information. And I think, again, just for reference, this idea of our independence as HIWU is important. And so when we talk later in this session about collaboration and information sharing, it's also important for people participating in these discussions to understand that there's a framework for that, and there are reasons why we need to make sure that we are intaking information, using it responsibly, but not putting individuals outside of our organization in a position to be perceived as having the resource under HIWU to target things on their own will. So that is an important part. So when we think about information sharing, we will always keep that in mind. And it carries over a little bit into some of the things that happen after an investigation, during the results management process. It is very specific in the rules who we share information with and when. And it's important that we follow that to protect the rights and the interests of the covered horses or the covered persons who are part of any potential investigation or results management process. So for us, the strength is, how do we do it? And this panel represents that. Remembering that we have mandates that include investigations, science, results management, education, and testing. All of those things working together. And we've really spent the better part of the last 2.5 years for most of us trying to build a foundation, trying to set up a testing program that allows us to have the infrastructure and the logistics to collect samples, to securely transport samples, to work in conjunction with the tracks and the states, to have voluntary agreements, to access sample collection personnel, veterinarians, investigators. Mary's been hard at work with the labs to set them up for success under the HEAL accreditation program that is coming about next year. And so that foundation is there, and now we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we constantly make this program better? And I think I want to share and kind of created a list of why I think HIWU has some unique opportunity in this space. And the first is about national coverage. We don't, as a program, if something comes in, we're looking and saying, okay, first of all, what does investigations think about this? What does science tell us about this? What can testing do in response? And again, to that question of, is this isolated? We get information on selections from stewards, and we look across the industry at where else that trainer may have horses. If a steward sees something at one track, we want to be able to consider whether or not it has relevance in another jurisdiction. So that national perspective and ability to respond with a national strategy is really important. We have the opportunity for research to advance the science. We have, and I think within that are achieving, uniformity among the labs. We create the efficiencies and have done a lot of work to make the sample collection process secure and efficient so that that piece of the work that's happening at the tracks and in the barns is not where there are challenges or concerns being raised. We've used results management to ensure accountability. So again, you do all of this work if you can't ensure that if someone has intentionally violated the rules, they're going to be held to a very high standard when it comes to the sanctions. That's really important. So the legal work is important. Education is critical, making sure that this industry, that the stakeholders, understand the rules, but also their rights and their responsibilities. Thinking about how we pursue non-analytical cases, which is another important part of our kind of authority or jurisdiction. Thinking about prevention. So again, how do we respond to situations or things we're hearing in order to prevent instances where potentially, things are happening that are compromising the welfare of the horse, and people need education and information to attack prevention. We certainly take in information through conversations. So when we hear something, we reach out to the industry, and I think there's a call for that to continue to improve, and there's a commitment to do so, but there is a lot of expertise in this room and around this industry that we call on to help inform our strategies. And then finally, we are looking ever more, as we've talked about in the last couple of days, at trying to leverage technology. And so I shared this point because I think it's a good segue. If you were in the AI session yesterday, Zoe for Palantir shared this slide. And I think what it illustrated to me, and I asked her if I could use it, is this notion that, it illustrates how do we bridge the gap, really, between what we think we know, what we actually know, and what we need to know. And to me, I'm always fascinated with the amount of data in this industry, but equally, the human thought piece comes into play. And so without those two elements and figuring out how to kind of capitalize and maximize the potential of both, we're going to be, unable to move forward. So there is some machine reasoning in there, but ultimately, when we continue this conversation, it comes down a lot to the human thought element of what we're trying to do. So I think I will turn it over to Dr. Blea to kind of guide a further conversation on what we're doing within the testing program and his ideas as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Kate. So the initial title of this presentation was HIWU Behind the Curtain. And I think there's a lot of folks out in the industry that thinks that HIWU operates behind the curtain, so to speak, or in a vacuum. And I think that meetings like this, or this hour, is an opportunity for these folks up here and to demonstrate to you all that they don't operate in a vacuum. They don't operate behind the curtain. Real quick, to Kate's question, how many of you in the audience have either contacted HIWU with a tip or know someone that has contacted HIWU with a tip? If we could see a raise of hands, that'd be appreciated. Next question is, how many of you in the audience, if you were aware of something, if you had the opportunity or you had a relationship on the local level, and let's say an equine medical director, or a chief veterinarian or an equine medical director on the local level that you had a relationship with, and you knew something was going on, how many of you in the audience would contact that individual and let them know, hey, can you look into this, or can you make someone aware of this? Okay, so several more people have indicated that. And part of the goal here today is, one, we want to enhance collaboration between the local level and with HIWU. And the other part of the goal, for the purpose of safety and welfare of the horse as well as integrity of the sport, is to not only enhance that collaboration, but try to demonstrate how that collaboration is already in place. So that being said, let's say, for example, I'll give you some examples. I get a call from somebody that says, hey, doc, we know these guys are doing this. They're doing it at 3 o'clock. You know, they're doing it every Friday, and I'm just making up a hypothetical, but I do have some real life examples. You know, we're getting beat every day. We're getting, you know, this is ridiculous. We've had enough. Another example is I'll get called and say, you know, this guy's got 40 horses. He's never there. He's program training. You know, we're getting real tired of this, and we're getting beat by this. So I get those calls as on the local level, and having been on the backside for many, many years. I've built a lot of relationships on the racetrack. Having been in the industry for many, many years, I've built a lot of relationships in the industry, specifically with HIWU. So say for example, someone's program training. I may pick up the phone and I'll call Shaun. I say, Shaun, or I'll see one of his investigators. Guys, people are getting really tired of this. Can you look into this? So Shaun, what happens after that? Does it just disappear, or, I mean, yeah, thanks, bye?
No, we collect the intelligence, the information. We deploy our resources with analysts, take a look at the individual. We see if we have sources that can give us information that would, you know, corroborate the, you know, program training or any other tip that we have. And then if we can better match our resources to their activities, and it leads us in directions where we can get to that problem through science or through testing, we, you know, collaborate together, bounce ideas off each other, and try to better catch up to, you know, the evidence that's needed to pursue, you know, a regulation, you know, that pertains to program training or, you know, testing of a certain substance. It's an ongoing investigation from day one. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to turn out. Our job is to take that information, see if we can use it in a way to build a successful database that will be there for future investigations if needed. At the very least, we look into everything to see if it's a legitimate, you know, potential lead or one that is not of substance, and then we move on.
So moving along with that, let's say there's some contraband found on the racetrack, and trainer's, you know, he's winning races, he's doing well, but let's say the investigators find some contraband. That goes to HIWU. How do you deal with that from each one of yours positions? Dr. Scollay, can you start with that?
Sure. Sure. Typically, if the investigative team comes across something in the field, a container with an unknown substance or something mislabeled or something that raises the level of suspicion about what's actually in there and what it does and whether or not it is a prohibited substance, they'll reach out to science. Maybe the product's labeled and we can look up what the ingredients are and see if there is concern. Maybe it doesn't have any label on it, in which case we'll talk to Shaun about what he understands this mystery substance is supposed to be doing. That may help us have an understanding of how we need to instruct a laboratory to analyze that substance to see if we can find something in it. This notion that you send something to the lab and just tell them to test for everything is a notion and not a reality. The more information the laboratory can have in analyzing an unknown substance, the more likely they are to give us an analytical result that is actually informative of an ongoing investigation. Now, if we identify what the substance is, then I'm going to do a number of things. I may reach out to Jeff and say, have you heard any more about this? I may reach out to other equine medical directors to ask if they've heard things going on in their jurisdictions. I may call private practitioners and say, have you seen this? Have you seen people selling it? Are they selling it to veterinarians? Are they selling it to horsemen? Have you any familiarity with this product? And I can make those calls across the country. I'll reach out to our labs. Has everybody got a method for detecting this substance? If some labs do and some labs don't, let's get everybody on the same page, make sure all the labs have got the method for detecting this substance, that they're all detecting it with the same sensitivity, so that regardless of where a sample, which laboratory a sample goes to, we're going to get consistent analytical results. I may reach out to international regulators or international laboratories to see if they have had experience with this substance in other cases, if they've heard similar rumors, how they are responding to them, have there been any cases, and if so, what were the facts of those cases, because that can help me inform Shaun and Kate. If testing is an option, we can discuss what strategically is the optimal time to perform sampling, what samples should we get. You know, if the substance can only be detected in urine, there's not much point in pulling a blood sample. So once I've gotten the scientific information, I turn back to these guys, tell them what I've learned, and then Kate and Shaun will develop a strategic approach to sampling.
No, I think the big point is we're not siloed. We work collaboratively at the same time to try to push our testing program, our strategy together. You know, once we figure out that we have an ability to test for something, then we talk back and forth with Kate to see the opportunity to have the staffing in the right position to be successful gaining a sample. Constantly talking to Mary, you know, I'm hearing this from the sources. They're telling me they're using this substance a certain way. You know, can you bounce it off the equine medical directors to get better guidance? Is this something that's even, you know, plausible, the way in which we're hearing it being used through the sources? So it's not, you know, information that just goes into one area and is strictly siloed. It's constantly being pushed back and forth on an ongoing basis from every position. I mean, Kate has people all over interacting on a constant basis day to day. They hear a lot of information. They're constantly pushing that to me, to Mary, you know, back and forth on an ongoing, you know, basis that has proven to be successful, because we have gotten more efficient with the way in which we deploy our resources.
So Kate, now this goes to you. So you're hearing a lot of things about what's going on. Who are you hearing it from? Number one. Secondly, now that you've got, you know, some identifiable contraband and some potential of abuse of a controlled medication or banned substance, what's your plan? You know, there's an assessment that's been made, but what's your plan as far as testing strategy? You know, one of the things HIWU focuses on is targeted testing versus random. So what's your plan moving forward, either post-race, out of comp? How do you handle that internally? Not only internally, but within the other two operational segments.
Yeah, so I think the who we hear it from, sometimes it's Mary and Shaun. Sometimes we'll hear directly from someone who's part of our sample collection personnel that they have seen or are aware of something at the track. And so sometimes information regarding the potential to confiscate contraband would be initiated through them. So I think it can come in, to Shaun's point, a lot of different ways. Mary touched on, you know, the list of questions I would ask, which is, you know, is this a known or an unknown substances? What is the best opportunity to deploy testing to potentially identify or detect this substance? So that means timing. It means which type of test we're going to do. Both, you know, the post-race offers a broader menu than potentially the out-of-comp. It means, do we need hair, urine, and or blood? So the matrix consideration is really important. And then it really comes down to making sure that we have the resources at the tracks to deploy the testing program. Because I'll go back one step, because I think the only thing I didn't hear from these two that would also go into the consideration is this limited to a specific horse or a specific population of horses, or is there a strategy that we need to be doing research to say, you know, where else does this trainer have horses? Where else, if it leads to a potential vet practice, where else might they have a practice? So what other information do we have that would suggest we maybe look beyond just this single initial source to broaden our ability to respond? But then it really comes down to deployment of human resource from sample collection personnel to facilitate the sample collection if and when we decide that that's the right response.
So, great, thank you. So, going back to that question you asked, it seems as if there's a disconnect between information that's out there and information you may be receiving. And I think we need to bridge that gap. And in any effective testing strategy, you can't rely 100% on the laboratories. You have to rely on boots on the ground. And that takes resources, right? Santa Anita has cameras instilled throughout the barn area. Dr. Benson and I, or more specifically Dr. Benson, if there's an issue, we'll review those cameras. If there's been a horse that was injured, colic, so forth, that's an investment. But there's an opportunity here, I think, that we need to recognize and engage, and that's the people on the local level. And if you have horsemen who have a relationship with an equine medical director or someone like that, who has relationships with other people, it takes effective communication and relationships. So on my side of things, you talked about testing results and management, and you all, in California, we deal with 3 different breeds. So when it's quarter horse thoroughbred, I'm intimately involved with testing strategies, results. Thoroughbreds, that goes to HIWU. However, based upon our voluntary service agreement, I'm able to see those test results for vetless work and post-race. I don't think that's uniform across the country, and that's dependent upon the voluntary service agreement. So with that in mind, Shaun, how do we improve that so we improve some of that collaboration?
Well,
and get the buy-in from those people.
It's relationship building. It's present. It's the ability to make a phone call and have the person, on my end, pick up the phone at any time and share as much as we possibly can share. As you mentioned, the voluntary agreements limit our ability sometimes to be able to push out certain information. But a large part comes down to just consistent communication, being accessible, and being open-minded to just listening. And any investigation that I've ever been part of has been, the best ones have been driven by people telling you what's going on, giving you angles to try to use your resources to catch up to the reality of the situation. So if I had to say one thing, it's communication.
And that's a two-way street, right? So, and speaking from the horseman side, or the equine medical director side, I think it's prudent upon us as individuals to reach out to HIWU. And I've taken that approach. I've had frustrations. I've also had successes. But the more I've done it, the more those relationships have blossomed. And I think it's been very helpful for California. I can tell you, from personal experience, I've had issues with parts of the program, working horses off the vets list for clenbuterol. The rule didn't make any sense. I reached out to Kate. We spent 4 or 5 hours. How many attorneys? That got resolved. Had issues with investigations. I made the effort, put out the olive branch, reached out to Shaun. We had some really hard conversations. I learned a lot. I think Shaun learned a lot. But it's incumbent upon us in the field to reach out to them, so there's not a riverbed between us. There's a bridge here, and there's an opportunity here, but it takes 2 players. So I think, I would encourage the local level to reach out to HIWU to help make the testing strategy more effective, and I would encourage the boots on the ground, the horsemen, to have those relationships with those equine medical directors to continually communicate with them. That will enhance the testing strategy and program. But the flip side of that is, how does HIWU improve that communication? And I'm going to start with Dr. Scollay, because all communication is based on relationships. So how does HIWU do that from each one of your positions?
Well, I think I'm fortunate because I've been in the industry for so long that I come in with a lot of relationships, or I know an awful lot of people, and so I'm comfortable reaching out to people, and I think people are comfortable reaching out to me, and I think, you know, an appreciation of the skill set or the information or the worldview that each of us has is really important. I mean, Jeff can go to the backside of Santa Anita and say, you know what, that guy never parks his car there. He never, that's a different behavior for him. And that little piece of information can be very, very helpful to Shaun in terms of when and where to intervene and ask questions. That minor change in behavior, and that's not something that any of the three of us could know, that guy's behavior has changed. And so we need that information from him, and then we need to constructively use that information to get more information to determine if we've got an ongoing problem.
Now, Shaun, I've met several of your investigators. And you have a contract investigator that brings them into my office. We meet, we talk, get to know each other. Anymore, if I see anybody that's 6'4" and plays interior line on a football team, I think he's one of your investigators. But in your role, you know, I'll be honest with you, when it first started, it's like, we got it, we know what we're doing. And one of the things I tell your investigators is, this is a different world. And if you have questions, you don't know what, you don't know what a shed row is, please, I'll go with you and show you, because there's no such thing as a dumb question. So in your section of operations, how do you communicate to your investigators to build those relationships, and are they doing that?
Well, they're constantly pushed to inquire when they're out in the field to the people that know what's going on, know the business. For them to effectively do their job, they need resources. You're a resource. You know, they should be going to you, they should be asking you questions, gathering information, and vice versa. If we can get the industry to realize that we are a resource, we're here to try to catch up to an ongoing problem, and we need help, and collaboratively we can get there. But my guys are encouraged to get out and talk to as many people on a regular, ongoing basis as possible. And with that, they'll gain knowledge of the industry. They'll get more comfortable in and around the areas of the racetrack. They know investigations, and part of investigations is learning the subject matter that you're investigating. So that's a constant theme. We talk about it all the time, and I do believe, and tell me in your experience, that they have gotten better throughout the time that they've interacted at the racetracks as far as understanding the business.
That horse broke really poorly, but got himself in the race finally. So it was a slow start, and that was a big frustration for a lot of us. The other frustration that I think a lot of us experience, in this system, as equine medical directors, you always knew who was doing what were the results, you knew what lab tests were being done, you knew everything. That's a sea change. But I can tell you, in our situation, under our voluntary service agreement in California, I see all those results post-race. I see all the results, vetless work. I know which horses are being held for further testing, and I can tell you when that trainer is trying to enter a race, I'm the one they go to, and I'm the one that will look into it. If the racing office is trying to get a horse into a race, I will contact HIWU and say, hey, do we have any information I can get to the racing office or the trainer? And we've built those relationships. It took a lot of work because at first nobody trusted anybody. And I think that's human nature. But I was able to get to those racing offices and say, look, this horse is not going to be able to get in the entry box today. We won't have it back till then. The other part of that is, the voluntary service agreement. So I'm able to do that because of the way we negotiated our voluntary service agreement. And if I'm not mistaken, voluntary service agreements are currently being negotiated. So in your commissions or whoever's doing your negotiation, you can look at investigations. In other words, can your commission initiate it, or can only HIWU initiate it? Results management, we're not going to get in the middle of what they're doing. But again, this is an opportunity to be collaborative, to improve and enhance not only integrity, but the entire testing system and protocol. So.
And just to kind of add to what Dr. Blea said, I think it's important to realize that the language he's talking about when it comes to really being intentional about identifying recipients of notices from HIWU, whether it's for negative results, notice of sanction, those are now being specifically called out in every voluntary agreement. So we've added an annex to make that very clear and a very intentional part of the conversations around voluntary agreements, so that there's not a discrepancy among those signing the voluntary agreements that somebody's being offered something that somebody else isn't. We've put it in there because we realize it's an important part. I think likewise on the investigations, and candidly in realizing some of the conversations with Dr. Blea, there's additional language that makes it really clear that we understand, and Shaun, you can add to this, but within the scope of the voluntary agreement, investigators at the local level can initiate and respond to things. The key is that they then need to work in conjunction with Shaun's team. And so language has been added so that that point of the perceived barrier to action has been removed. And again, that's part of the voluntary agreement language that is drafted for, all signatories of the VA. So I just think that's an important distinction, that those things are now standardized, not just a kind of ad hoc thing. And to Dr. Blea's credit, he helped identify those opportunities within the voluntary agreement for other states to model.
And I can tell you honestly that I get very frustrated with HIWU. I get very frustrated with change. Nobody likes change. But what I've done and what I've embraced is communication. So I reach out, and it may take a little while, but my take-home message is they're listening, and there's been a lot of changes if you look at it substantively, not only on the HISA side, but on the HIWU side, because they're listening. And it's not one size fits all. You're not going to please all the people all the time. But the point I want to make is the issues that I come up with on a daily, weekly basis, I've learned to reach out. I've learned to communicate. Kate knows if I'm texting her or calling her, it's going to be an issue that needs to be worked through, and it gets worked through. So to bridge that riverbed, we have to communicate, but it takes two. They're listening, so we have to be talking. Whether you're talking individually as stakeholders, whether you contact someone you have a relationship with that can get it to HIWU, get it to the investigators, get it to Dr. Scollay. Once a week, I get a picture of a supplement, and from trainers, and I send it to HIWU, and is this prohibited or permitted? And I get that information back, and I get usually the answer back within the day. One day I got a picture of a feed bag, and I said, come on, you're going a little bit crazy here. So we have to reach out. In order for them to be more effective, we as an industry have to reach out and communicate our concerns, issues, and constructive criticism. I think you've heard today that they don't operate in silos. They work collaboratively internally, but they're also developing relationships and building relationships to make it more collaborative, because as an industry, we all have to work together. So we're going to get a little short on time, so I have I think I penned about 40 questions, but I'd like to leave about 10 minutes for audience questions or comments. So with that in mind, let's use the next 10 minutes for comments or questions. And if you have a comment or question, there's mics. They're out the room. Please step forward.
Hi, thank you for this panel. The question is for anybody on the panel who has the answer. So I've been in horse racing my whole life, but as a jockey and then a broadcaster, I really don't understand how it even starts that a trainer is using an illegal medication. So I don't know if this starts from some chemist approaches a vet and said, hey, tell your clients about this, or if a vet is pursuing it from chemists, or if trainers are looking for them, or if owners are introducing them to their trainers. So have you all sort of in your investigations so far figured out where the pipelines generally begin, how they begin?
All of the above.
Okay.
I mean, to be simple, the answer is it comes from all different directions. You know, I see certain trends where you see certain relationships with, you know, an individual that's a trainer that has, you know, a family member that's a vet, or somebody that's in a pharmaceutical company, or an owner that has that relationship. But, you know, the simple answer is it comes from all different directions on a continual basis.
My name is Honor. My family has been breeding racehorses for about 35 years. My question has to do with pre-race testing. Have a short story to kind of preface my question. Had a homebred who was in a stakes race. He had a random pre-race drug test. The way the drug test went, blood test, absolutely lost his mind, had a meltdown, kind of quivering in his stall. So we felt we went into the race at a disadvantage, came in second. So I guess my question is, how do you complete the pre-race testing and not create a disadvantage for potential competitors?
I think part of that is it's part of racing, the TCO2 testing that is pre-race. And so I think Mary can elaborate on concepts around schooling and making sure that we have horses come in prepared, and then it's our obligation with our sample collection personnel to provide service that is efficient in an environment that is appropriate for that testing. So I think it's a combination of things. I mean, we certainly, you know, I think more often than not are able to ensure a controlled environment, but we certainly understand that there are instances where that's challenging for the groom and the people handling the horse if they're worked up like that. So I think it's a conversation to figure out how do we navigate that and still meet the requirement that creates equity in the industry, which is that all horses need to be subject to that testing.
I'm going to jump in there on this one. And so prior to HIWU, we had a few horses that were really bad in the test barn for TCO2 testing, to the point of where they would either hurt you or try and hurt themselves. And we were aware of that, but then all of a sudden we had a list of 85 horses that were really bad and couldn't have their blood drawn. And what I noticed was one trainer told another trainer who told another trainer, and now they want to either have their TCO2 testing done in their own stall or not have it done. I came in and said no, and I reviewed who was who and who was doing what, and there were definitely some people that all of a sudden had 12 horses that would lose their mind in the test barn. So I took a hard stance and basically cut that list down to about 2 or 3, because at the end of the day, my goal was no horse gets hurt and no human gets hurt. And I think we narrowed it down to 2. And then HIWU came along, and Dr. Scollay and I had a long conversation about this, because I wouldn't, you know, die on that hill. I said, no, it's not fair to the other 9 in the stake race that they have to do this, and the one that gets his TCO2 taken in his stall and hangs out beats the other 9. That's not fair to the other 9. So we had a long conversation about it. I think where we landed was, you know, based on the experience that I had, everybody gets treated the same. We have to protect the integrity. Obviously, no horse gets hurt, no human gets hurt. And I tell our people, if you go sample a horse, and you know, horses can do any number of things, as we all know. If that horse is at risk of getting hurt, or any humans at risk of getting hurt, you abort the mission, and that gets recorded in the iPad. So safety has to come first, but it's, you know, integrity is leading that way. So unfortunately, we saw people gaming the system and try to abuse it.
Thank you.
I mean, I'd just add that a needle-shy horse, and everybody's got one or has had one over the years, we will send in calm, competent staff to attempt the draw. To Jeff's point, if anybody at any point on our collection team feels at risk or unsafe, we do not ask them to persevere. We don't want anybody getting hurt for the sake of a blood tube. But, right, the horse that's bad to stick is really no different in some ways than the horse that doesn't want to stand in the gate very long, right? The trainer's drawn the 2-hole, and this horse does not like to stand, and this horse is going to stand because it's a 12-horse field. That starter is not going to load that horse last. That horse is going to go in, and that's racing luck, right? And so we are not going to target horses that are hard to sample, but they are not going to get treated any differently than any other horse, because that's the only thing that's fair to all the competitors.
Hi, Ray Pollack with a question. Before this panel, there was a student that gave a presentation on perceptions of HISA, interviewed small trainers, small barn trainers, and it was, the perception was 70 to 80% of super trainers are still using performance-enhancing drugs. It's actually gotten worse under HISA. I don't know the methodology of the presentation, but it was alarming to hear that. And it goes along with what I hear from a lot of horsemen, that grade HIWU HISA are catching a lot of overages of therapeutic medication, but they're not catching cheaters. How do you respond to that?
You want me to?
Well,
There you go. You go, girl. Okay.
well, investigations take time, right? Sophisticated individuals who have access to designer-type substances that are effective, you're not going to find them in a month or two. It's going to take, a good, well-thought-out plan of catching up to that with testing, science, building the human resources to get you closer to that activity. It's a difficult concept to try to push out when everybody sees everything right in front of them. These type of investigations take, months, years, and you have to use, an approach that is enterprise theory, network type investigation, where you're looking at it from different angles, trying to put groups of people together that'll get you closer to those type of activities.
Yeah, I guess I just add the complexity of the testing piece, because if it is a novel substance, something that some new special stuff, on our end, it's ideal if we can get a hold of it and the laboratories can identify it. But that's just step one, because we have to figure out what happens to that substance once it's in the horse. Because we're either going to get a blood sample or a urine sample, and if that substance is metabolized into a different molecule, that's what we have to look for. So we have to know that, or the labs aren't going to be able to find it. So we may have to do research, whether it's administration studies or incubating the drug with liver cells to see what the liver does to metabolize that drug. And then once we've identified the metabolite, where are we going to find it? What sensitivity do we need to find it? There can be a huge research component in pursuing a novel substance that has been, hopefully confiscated, so we've got something to work with. Otherwise, it's out in the air, and developing a test for something, for an analyte that you haven't seen, it can be very challenging.
I think that circles back to kind of the point of this session was 70 to 80% of the local level believes that the big trainers are using performance-enhancing drugs. Is that what you quoted? If the local level's aware of it, but HIWU's not aware of it, that's the problem. And that's the problem we're trying to solve here today, is to bridge that gap so that those relationships can be built, that communication can occur, because you know as well as I do, things that go on the backside that you and I hear about, but Shaun may not hear about it for 6 months. And that's what has to change. And I think, you know, that illustrates the point of how do we enhance communication, collaboration to make this testing strategy as effective as it can be. So, my opinion. Would anybody on the panel like to make a final comment before we conclude?
I would just add, I think what struck me in this conversation today, and it's a shift even in Dr. Blea's thinking, is the idea that what we're asking is for you to help inform a strategy. We're not asking for snitches, we're not asking for tips, we're not asking for revenge. We're asking for information to inform this program, to make it more effective for the industry. So I think if you think about the conversations with that mindset, I think it can be a powerful shift in why this topic is important. I feel like Mary, you have good closing thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, this is a partnership. We all want this sport to succeed. We want it to flourish. We want people to have confidence in wagering on it, in competing in it, knowing that, you know, it's on the merits of the talent of the horse and the skill of the trainer. So I know that there are still reservations out there about us, but I guess I just want to say that we're here for you guys, and we want this to go well. So we need your help, and we will do our best for you.
Ann, you have a comment?
Could you guys let the audience know the best way to reach out to you if they would like to talk to you?
We've got the tip lines. You know, there's many different ways. You know, the investigators are there on a regular basis. Call any of us. We'll respond. You know, we have Real Response, which is an anonymous text platform that seems to be, you know, very good as far as people are comfortable. We get into a two-way conversation on that, which builds into a relationship that has been fruitful thus far.
And I think I was getting a little more specific. These guys are available in the room right across the hall for the rest of the day. And if they don't have your cards, you have them with you, and you could feel free to go in and get a card. I was getting a little bit more specific there, just.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Sandy, if you could put back up the PowerPoint, if that's possible. There was one slide that did have kind of the specifics of the tip line, but I think one of the frustrations I hear sometimes is, well, I don't know who to call. And so I think part of this is, yes, there are these resources which are available to the industry and are going to allow for anonymous reporting if that's the preference, but there's also people sitting here and, you know, in the offices who can take that information, and the end result of, regardless of that input, is a conversation like we had here today about how do we respond to that issue. So it's, you know, we don't necessarily think there is a one-size-fits-all solution to who to contact, but the key is to use a format that works for you, whether that's, again, knowing that you have somebody at your track or in your racing commission who is, you know, trusted by the local horsemen to be kind of a conduit to HIWU. That's okay too. So the most important thing is that the information is being exchanged. But these are good, you know, publicly available sources, and will get you to any of us as well, if that's your preference.
Okay, with that, we're out of time. Thank you all for your attendance, and have a great day.
All right, there's coffee in the hallway. We'll take a 15-minute break and return at 10:15.